Speaking of things the government slips in on us in the middle of the night, there was also another big development over the past week where they passed this new $1.5 trillion spending bill that pretty much nobody had really heard about or had their hands on prior to its passage. And I think you've got more details on this, but it's pretty scandalous.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the swamp in a nutshell, isn't it? And honestly, I was depressed by how Congress passing this massive spending bill last week, like, barely anyone noticed. I mean, They did do some reporting about it, but it was just so overshadowed by everything in the news. And I'm like, this is pretty important. So anyway, the short version is this. At 2:30 in the morning on Wednesday last week, so probably a week ago today from when you're listening to this, Congress, the leaders like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they released their 2,700-page budget bill that spent $1.5 trillion. It increased domestic spending even more, increased military spending. It's basically just flooded with an increase in spending across the board for everybody. They do this thing in Congress where the progressives are like, cut military spending, increase social spending, and conservatives, in air quotes, some of them are like, increase military spending, decrease social spending, and then they just agree on increasing it all. That's basically what this bill did. And yet, the really messed up part is not that, because that's par for the course. It's that they released this 2,700-word page bill on 2:30 in the morning on Wednesday, and they had to vote Wednesday afternoon. So nobody who voted for this, except the leadership that crafted it behind closed doors, actually read or even skimmed this legislation allocating trillions of dollars of our money.
I often say when people are like, why don't you want to run for office? Why don't you want to run for office? I'm like, for what? For what? To sit in a room and fundraise all day? Because you don't get to actually pass bills or like make laws, right? You have to come in. You barely even get to read the bills these days. The leadership of the two-party system sits in a room with lobbyists. They come up with what it's going to be. They come in and they say, these are your talking points and you're going to vote this way on it. And if you don't, then they primary you and they take you off of your committees and they take away your chairs and you don't even get to have any fun. You're just a yes or no vote. Like, this is a charade. Congress is a charade. You don't have representatives anymore. You don't have lawmakers anymore. You have a few people in party leadership who are literally passing. Can you fathom the power of passing a 2,700-page bill and it's like 10 people that actually got a say in it? That's atrocious. And we're about to do this in real time. I've actually not dug into what's even in this awful monstrosity yet, but I'm prepared to be scandalized, so hit me.
You should be, and that's why they do it like this. They put it all into what's called an omnibus spending package, and they cram it into 2,700 pages, because if they actually did what Congress is supposed to do and passed a different budget bill for every department of the federal government and then had hearings and open comment on it and debated it and accepted amendments, most of the stuff they fund wouldn't pass. But what they can do is they can just cram a million things into this. And then, for example, what they do is they essentially like bully you into voting for it by what you said, right? The political power the leaders have with committee assignments and all this stuff, but also in other ways. So, for example, this 2,700 spending bill funds literally hundreds of thousands of different things, most likely. Thousands. One of them is a small pay increase for soldiers. So if you vote against this bill, they will accuse you of voting against pay increases for soldiers, which is not something, politically speaking, most members of Congress want to have to go home and explain to their constituents. Because while you and I might be down to decrease military spending, most people, at least when it comes to soldier pay, and I honestly don't know what soldiers are really paid, so I don't have a take on it. But just regardless, politically, that's a very bad thing to be accused of. And so they'll put a few things in this, and then they'll accuse you of opposing soldier pay or, trying to shut down the government. And it's like, well, you're the ones that broke this entire system. And then the other thing they do, that's the stick. But they also have the carrot, which is they put earmarks. They brought back earmarks, which are these crony pet project handouts. They slip into the bill. They brought them back, and this bill had 4,000 earmarks totaling $10 billion of our dollars slipped into it, which are basically just special little handouts for things in members' home districts to get them to vote for this monstrosity. So we're going to run through the top 10 that I cataloged at Fee, and I'll include a link to the article if you want to find the original sources and more information. The top 10 absurd earmarks that were slipped into this, just to give you guys a sense of what Congress is doing here. So number one, $995,000 of our money for a project on soil health at New Mexico State University.
Awesome. Here we go. I see there is $1.5 million for tree restoration in Ohio. And it's funny, like, already in reading through these, you can see, like, requested by Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. It's like you said, every senator gets kind of their little pet project they can take back to their district and be like, look what I got for you. Gross.
Mm-hmm. Like Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, where I'm from originally, got $1 million for the Multicultural Innovation Center at the Rhode Island Black Business Association. And it's like, oh, good, I'm glad that as a Virginia taxpayer, I get to pay for tree restoration in Ohio and the Providence Multicultural Innovation Center. What?
Unbelievable. Also, $60 million to renovate the research facilities at the University of South Alabama College of Medicine, requested by Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama. Now, tell me, don't we pay enough in student tuition to more than fund universities taking care of their own buildings?
Well, and of course, all the non-doctors who pay taxes should pay for that, right? And of course, please note, guys, Richard Shelby, that's a Republican. This list is not all Democrats. This is a bipartisan thing. So next up, we've got $160,000. This one cracked me up. It's honestly the funniest one. $160,000 to study the sustainability of astronaut food at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania.
The sustainability. Have you ever had astronaut food?
I don't think I have.
I went to the Space Museum when I was little, because I lived in Alabama, where near Huntsville, where the Space Museum is. And I've had space food. And what do you mean sustainability? It is like frozen in a packet. It'll last for decades.
Well, they mean like climate change.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I hate it here. All right. Number 6, $109,000 for facility improvements to a local art center, requested by Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont.
Glad that we're funding the arts in Vermont, Hannah.
So,
Never been to Vermont. Have you?
Never been to Vermont, and I firmly believe that people in the arts should have to succeed or fail based on if they're any good. I don't think that I should have to subsidize people's art. If you're not able to sell your art, maybe pick a different field.
Well, and also, most of these things, of these 4,000 earmarks, most of them have no business being funded by the government at all. But, like, even if you were to believe they should be funded locally.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Vermont, if a city in Vermont wants to tax its local residents to pay for an art center or something, that should happen at the city level. Because then they actually have to weigh the costs and benefits. And the residents probably are going to say, heck no, we don't want to pay for that. But when they can just pass it on to the federal government in the abstract, then it feels like nobody's really paying for it. So why not get a new art center?
Right, and 2 notes here. Like, you're right. Would anybody actually show up and vote for this in Vermont? No. This is obviously a pet project of somebody connected to the senator, because why do people, like, if you come back, you're like, I got you $200 million for the arts, people would be like, what the heck? Bring down our taxes, right? Like, that's not even something that would impress your voters. Yeah, it's not even that won't even impress your voters. That is something that they are doing as a special favor for somebody who's associated with that center. It's just straight cronyism is what this is. It's not capitalism. It's super corrupt. And it reiterates my belief that, like, if I got to restructure a country from scratch, I would structure it to where everybody has to vote on anything that government's going to spend money on, and only the things that voters approve get funded. Like, see if people actually want to pay for this, and if they want to, they vote to pay for it, and that's how you proceed with how you're going to spend money. But
I think at the very least, we should have a constitutional amendment prohibiting omnibus packages. Every different bill should have to be voted on separately. Also, Rand, not to get off on too much of a tangent, well, it's a little different. He has an amendment that would say, it's called, like, read the bills, and it basically forces, for every 10 pages or whatever, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but for every bill length, you must have 24 hours between the release and the vote.
Oh,
so for something like this, they would have had to give 100 days in between the release and the vote. And that might be enough time for senators in their offices to actually read what they're voting. But of course, his amendment's not going to go anywhere. So up next, we've got Senator Sanders of Vermont, of course, requested $200,000 to provide IT and tech support for women and minority-owned businesses via the Vermont Center for Women and Enterprise.
Does this man ever do anything but pander? Anything but. Like, I
think
so
he's just down to spend our money. Any possible way to spend more of other people's money. He's like, slam that yes button.
This is getting to be really pervasive in our government. We're like, we have to fund this for women, we have to fund this for... I'm like, no. Let women keep their money. Like, I don't need you to do crap for me as a woman. Stop. I hate that. Next up, we have $2 million for a pilot program to try an electric vehicle-based ferry system in Alaska from Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. I don't even really know what that means, an electric vehicle-based ferry system.
So like, I guess boats that are electric.
Boats that are electric.
You're paying for them to experiment with new types of boats in Alaska.
The thing is, if that was a good idea, the market would just do it. Right? If it was going to be more efficient, like, that would actually just happen. Just like we've seen that happen in the car industry without government. So, like...
But what this means is that there's a special company or investor that donates to Lisa Murkowski, and I'm not picking on her. A lot of them do this.
Just about
donates to her campaign or is influential in Alaska or something, and they're getting a special handout because of their proximity to power. Just like this next one, Congresswoman Ann Kirkpatrick of Arizona got $600,000 for the YMCA of Southern Arizona from federal taxpayers. Like, I've never been to Arizona. Not planning on it.
Also, like, I don't understand. It's just not right. The YMCA, why does the YMCA get $600,000 but Life Fitness doesn't? Like, it's so corrupt. It's just,
because
I hate
YMCA
it. I really...
is connected with Ann Kirkpatrick, and the other one isn't. It's literally that
Basically.
simple.
That's not capitalism, guys. For the record, that is not capitalism. All right, rounding this out, we have $110,000 for a food truck and refrigerated van for the Spanish American Center in Massachusetts, requested by Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts. Okay.
Literally, what? What are these priorities?
I just like... I know. I'm like, how much money are these people giving you where you're like, I've got to get this food truck and refrigerated van for my district. Make sure that's in there. Make sure that's in there.
So
of all
things. One thing that people will say when I bring stuff up like this, they always come back with this. They say, oh, $600,000, that's nothing in a 1.5 trillion bill. That's peanuts. That's whatever. And it's like, you are correct. $110,000 for a Spanish American food center in Massachusetts is not that much money in the grand scheme of things. But you have to understand that this is symbolic of what they're doing throughout this legislation. And they're doing this across millions of different little projects. It's not like any one of these is that big a deal. It's that they reveal how much contempt our legislators have for the notion of being responsible with our money and what complete disregard they have, and it's pervasive across all of this. So don't come to me and say, oh, only 10 billion in a 1.5 trillion bill, because it's like, yeah, that's just the examples. There's so much more in there that we'll find over the next 9 months where we actually read this bill. I hate when people say that.
But also, just because those are smaller percentages within the bill doesn't mean that they're small amounts of money. That's still a lot of money. That's still a lot of waste. And the fact is, the big bill as a whole is $1.5 trillion. They shouldn't be spending $1.5 trillion. That's absurd. That is not something you would have ever even seen in previous decades. I just don't think people understand how much money that is. And all of this adds up to getting to that final number. It doesn't excuse any of it.